One of the things I hear a lot when I meet with my couples is that one partner might think their significant other is a narcissist. Now, to be fair, there is such a thing as narcissistic personality disorder and narcissistic tendencies. But given that NPD or narcissistic personality disorder only exists for about 0.5% of the general population in the United States, so less than 1%, the extent to which I hear one partner complain that they're married to a narcissist is statistically very low or unlikely. But that doesn't mean that they aren't exhibiting some narcissistic traits. So in this episode, I thought let's break down what narcissism really is, what it looks like in relationships, and what, if anything, is your partner really trying to accomplish with their narcissistic behavior? Let's get started.
Welcome to Trauma-Free Relationship, a podcast that provides support and guidance to help heal the wounds of attachment trauma. Whether you find yourself struggling with unresolved issues in the past or have experienced trauma in your current relationship, our goal is to provide accurate, scientifically informed information as well as the tools to help you create a secure connection between you and your partner. And here's your host, Tom Philp.
Okay, as I mentioned in the opening, clinical narcissism exists for less than 1% of the general population. So the likelihood of your partner truly being a narcissist is very low. However, that doesn't mean that what you are experiencing in your relationship with your partner is all in your head, by no means. On the contrary, there may be behaviors that could fall into the classification of narcissism that you're seeing in your partner. So before we go any further, it's important for me to also say in this episode that in no way am I diagnosing you or your partner. I want to make that very, very clear. This is not a diagnosis today. We're going to talk about what true narcissism really looks like and how what you're seeing in your partner is going to be different than what a clinical diagnosis or clinical classification of narcissism is. But in no way are you to construe this as me diagnosing your partner. And I want to make that very clear. To have a diagnosis, I would have to do a full clinical assessment, an intake with extensive interviews, and so on and so forth. It's very comprehensive in order to have a diagnosis of such. So I don't want anybody to think that, oh, well, Tom said my partner exhibits narcissistic tendencies, so they must be a narcissist. That's not what I'm saying. What I really want to do in this episode is see if we can't tease apart the common nomenclature that we hear in culture about somebody who might be a narcissist versus what you're seeing where your partner might be really focused on their needs. And it looks like narcissism, but maybe there's something else going on there. And so I just want to sort of tease that apart because I hear this often enough that I thought it was important to address. But I want to be clear that this is not a diagnosis. And I want to just clear up some of those distinctions between true narcissism and what you may be experiencing in your relationship. So let's start with a clinical diagnosis of a narcissist. What does that look like? Well, if we were going to clinically diagnose somebody, then we would have to meet certain criteria. And the manual we use to do that is called the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. It's currently on its 5th edition. And that is the huge manual that has grown over time. Bigger and bigger and bigger, it seems, that has all of the mental disorders, so to speak, in it. And so if as a therapist, if I was to diagnose somebody, then I would have to meet criteria laid out in this manual that has been assembled by hundreds, if not thousands, of therapists over time. Now, I also want to say that the best diagnosis we have available to us is called a rule-out system, meaning that we have taken surveys from experts, surveys from the general public, And we have looked at behaviors and clumped them together, and that if an individual exhibits a certain number of behaviors in this cluster, then that is how we diagnose them. So if we were diagnosing somebody with depression, they would have to exhibit, say, 4 of 7 of these behaviors before we could say they have clinical depression. And these behaviors are backed up statistically by the research we do into this particular quote unquote disorder and the cluster of behaviors that surround it. So that is the extent. It's not like a doctor that can draw some blood and we can look at the cells underneath the microscope. Our tools are not that advanced. And so there's some flaws here. This is a controversial system, believe it or not. But this is the best we have at this point, and it does provide a common language across all mental health experts. So this diagnostic manual that we have, that's essentially how it works. I just want you to be aware of that. So there are 9 behaviors that are clustered in the DSM under narcissistic personality disorder. And in order for somebody to be diagnosed with this, they would have to meet at least 5 of these 9 behaviors. So the first thing it states is there is a pervasive pattern of grandiosity, fantasy, or behavior, a need for admiration with a lack of empathy, beginning in early childhood, and as indicated by at least 5 of the following. Number 1, has a grandiose sense of self-importance. So exaggerates achievements, expects to be recognized as superior without actually completing the achievements. Number 2, is preoccupied with fantasies of success, power, brilliance, beauty, or perfect love. Number 3, believes that they are special and can only be understood by or should only associate with other special people or institutions. Number 4, requires excessive admiration. Number 5, has a sense of entitlement, such as unreasonable expectations of favorable treatment or compliance with his or her expectations. Number 6, is exploitative and takes advantage of others to achieve their own ends. Number 7, lacks empathy and is unwilling to identify with the needs of others. Number 8, is often envious of others or believes that others are envious of them. Number 9, shows arrogant, haughty behaviors and attitudes. So remember, from a clinical standpoint, 5 of these 9 have to be accomplished. Or accomplished is not the right word. They have to exhibit 5 of these 9 behaviors. So as you can see, statistically, less than 1% of the general population is narcissistic, meaning clinically could be diagnosed with that. What more is likely to happen is that your partner is exhibiting some of these, but typically within the relationship that is causing them some kind of stress, some kind of disillusion. Maybe they're scared or they're being triggered within the relationship. And so as a result, sometimes these behaviors can show up. Now, in addition, I've seen people act in narcissistic ways, again, such as a lack of empathy, wanting constant or needing constant validation, taking advantage of their partner to meet their own needs because they are in a distressed relationship, not because they have a clinical diagnosis of narcissism. I've also seen people act in ways that might be consistent with borderline personality disorder because they are in a distressed relationship. So when we feel a threat to our most significant relationship, it can cause us to act in uncharacteristic ways, unusual ways. And because the lingo is so common in our culture now with narcissistic or borderline or depression, oftentimes people attribute any 1 or 2 behaviors with that nomenclature, with that label. And that can kind of be dangerous. And some of that is is our own fault as therapists. But nonetheless, it doesn't always mean that there actually are a clinical narcissist or clinical borderline. Again, I've seen people act very unusual in behaviors and do some very odd things under duress because they are scared and frightened, or their past traumas have been triggered in their current relationship, and it's bringing out these certain behaviors that are causing this. So the last thing I will say about the criteria for narcissistic personality disorder is that it usually accompanies other mental health disorders as well: depression, anxiety, or traits from other personality disorders. It oftentimes is rare for us to get a person that is only exhibiting one particular kind of disorder, whether that be anxiety or depression. Oftentimes we get a cluster of things that are happening within the individual. I have treated narcissists before. I have clinically diagnosed narcissists before, and I can tell you, when you're in the presence of them, you truly know that something is off. You get little signals that just come up in your body that oh goodness, something is a little bit different here with this individual. And I can tell you, the vast majority of the couples I've seen, I never really get that feeling. What I get is that, oh, this person is exhibiting some behaviors that might be consistent with narcissism, but it's only because they are in a distressed relationship. And once we help the couple de-escalate the cycles, more often than not, what you see is those types of behaviors tend to go away. So at this point, maybe you're asking yourself, well, if my partner is acting in ways that look consistent with narcissistic personality disorder, but he or she is not narcissistic, then what might be going on with my partner? Well, first, we have to understand that underneath the narcissistic behavior is a fragile sense of self. This fragility is driven by low self-esteem, or for lack of a better word, is often due to a person overcompensating for low self-worth. And so I've seen many people that struggle with empathy, not because they lack the ability, but because they were brought up in an environment that did not model empathy. No one came to them when they were going through a traumatic event and sat with them and helped them build a coherent story and integrate that into a more coherent and stronger sense of self and their world. And we often know that with traumas, it's not always the event that is traumatizing. It is that nobody comes and sits with the person in their confusion, in their pain, in their overwhelmingness, if that's not really a word, but I'm going to use it anyway, and their feelings of overwhelming fear, and helps them make sense of that. Because that oftentimes, that level of attunement to a traumatic event can help actually lessen the effects of trauma and lessen the effects of PTSD. So oftentimes when the couple seeks help and learns to de-escalate, that these behaviors can go away. And since lack of empathy is one of the hallmarks of narcissism, I've seen a lot of people that struggle with that, not because they lack the ability, but rather because they did not have it modeled to them. And once they feel really understood and safe, then they can begin to empathize with others better. In addition, people with clinical narcissism really struggle to look inward and shine the spotlight on themselves to understand why they behave the way they do. So we call this the reflective function. And one of the things we know about true personality disorders, clinical personality disorders, is it really impedes the individual's ability to look inward. Most of their focus is outside of themselves. If my partner would just do this, if I would just be treated this way, if my colleagues would just do this, and they really struggle to look at how they contribute to the problem and how they might actually be creating some of the feedback that they're getting and the behavior from other people and the treatment they're getting from others. So most people with enough validation, meaning that if they have somebody that's able to come and truly understand their internal world and communicate that to them, they will eventually feel safe enough to look inward and reflect on their own role in the relationship problems. So it's much more likely that your partner, who looks like a narcissist and is operating from a more fragile sense of self and is overcompensating by clinging rigidly to only their experience of the relationship, that they can't let go of that rigidity for fear that they would actually sort of they would sort of come apart, right? That their sense of the way they see themselves is so fragile that they would have nothing to hang on to them then if they don't hang on to their version of reality. And the way they see themselves would more or less cease to exist. Disintegrate sort of is a word that's used in the literature some. And so oftentimes that low self-esteem, low self-worth is an overcompensation, and what you're seeing is somebody who really needs to be validated and needs to be understood at a deep level before they feel safe enough then to provide empathy and validation for you as a partner. I did another podcast, I think I called it Worlds of Meaning, when partners get locked in different perspectives. That's a little bit along these lines. I didn't tie it to narcissism per se, but I see this often with couples where both partners are holding so rigidly to their version of reality that they're not able to make room for any other versions, for their partner's versions. And so when we analyze in a relationship this idea of narcissism or fragility, it looks very different than the grandiosity exhibited outside the relationship that is so prevalent in the clinical diagnosis of narcissistic personality disorder. So if you look at a lot of the criteria, those 9 behaviors I've listed, a lot of them really focus on excessive need for feedback, excessive need for praise, excessive need for admiration. You don't often find that necessarily inside the intimate relationship. What you do find is that a partner that looks like they are a narcissist is really needing that validation before they can loosen their grip on their version of the relationship and accept other versions. And so we also see this at times in people with trauma, where the story they've told themselves about their past trauma, they just simply cannot believe that their partner's motivations or intentions might be anything different than what they've told themselves about how people treat them. And so if their partner says, "Oh, you look really good in that outfit," but underneath my trauma, I'm fragile, and I just simply cannot believe that. So I might even say thank you, but inside I'm thinking, they don't really mean that. They're just saying that because they're my husband, or they're just saying that because they want sex later, or they're just saying that because, a thousand other reasons. I minimize, I justify, I whatever to hold on to that story that I'm telling myself that was born out of experiences that I created this narrative of myself. And so often when we talk about our partner being narcissistic, what I think we're primarily talking about is a lack of empathy and a rigid view of themselves and their relationship that is driven by an overcompensating need or overcompensation that often can look demanding and controlling behavior. I absolutely see that. That their version of reality can be the only version in the relationship, and that they often don't see how they play a role in the distressed experiences that both partners are feeling in the relationship. So they often struggle to recognize how they contribute to the cycle. And so, when they have someone that is able to validate and view their view of themselves and their world, when they're able to create more room for alternate views, then they can create more flexibility in their identity to incorporate their partner's perspectives more. So they can move out of this rigidity, have more flexibility, and be able to then understand their partner's perspective of the relationship as well. This usually coincides, as I've said before, with the couple learning how to de-escalate those cycles that often keep them stuck. So I hope this has helped sort of tease apart the idea that, is my partner a narcissist? Because I see them focus so much on only their needs and so much on their version of reality, and their demanding and controlling behavior, along with a lack of empathy and a lack of self-reflection. I hope you can see that that's a little bit different than the clinical diagnosis of narcissists. That more likely what's happening is the stress or the re-traumatization, the triggers that are coming up in the relationship, is causing this person to go back to a place where they feel most safe, because that is the move that they have, the defensive behavior they have, that they know keeps them safe. And so they have to adhere rigidly to those behaviors in order to try to maintain their sense of identity and a cohesive, coherent sense of self that often can, absolutely from the outside, can look very selfish and very narcissistic. And so I hope this sort of helps tease things apart a little bit and answers that question that I get asked so often: is my partner a narcissist? The likely answer is no, but it doesn't mean that you're not experiencing some behaviors and seeing some behaviors in your partner that look similar to narcissism. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please feel free to give me any feedback. I would love to hear from you guys about what you want to hear more of and tailor this to you as best I possibly can. So as always, thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.
Thank you for listening to Trauma-Free Relationship, a podcast for the healing of attachment trauma. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, or our website at traumafreerelationship.com. Be sure to look for our next episode on your favorite streaming service.